Hello, I'm Javad.
And I'm Payvand, and this is our show, Rich Kids, A History of Shopping Malls in Tehran. Now, we were meant to be doing the show in London in April, but a global pandemic hit, theatres closed, and now we're all at home.
We thought about cancelling the show entirely, but this is a show that's fundamentally about how worlds end and what remains of them when they do. So we thought that's something we're all thinking about during the pandemic, and that's why we've made this version of it that you can watch at home.
Now, people keep calling this situation unprecedented, but in the historical context of plagues and empires crumbling, it definitely is precedented. Worlds have ended before. Our world feels so solid and unshakable, it's hard to imagine it ending. It's harder still to imagine something else taking its place.
But it does change radically, at least every decade. I mean, if you're anything like us, you'll have spent an awful lot of your lockdown messing around on Instagram, and that didn't exist until 10 years ago. Even the smartphone you're using itself, like its parts were broadly all invented by about 20 years ago, but it's only been on the market for, again, about maybe 10 or 12 years. Our world does seem to change rapidly, at least every decade.
So this is also a show about digital culture and consumerism.
Which is why we're asking you to have your phone on for parts of it, because, well, that lets me tell you a story about who we are and how we came to be at this point where we all hold these similar devices in our hands. It's a story we all know, and it goes a little something like this. What you hold in your hand is not an object, but an idea, first birthed in a California design studio that then escaped somehow and gathered hydrocarbons in the Persian Gulf. Bauxite in a mine in the Democratic Republic of Congo had its parts manufactured and put together in a factory in Guangdong before you dropped it and broke its first screen, and a guy called Megzi in a phone shop in Luton had to add a new one to it, and all of that only really remains solid for like one moment, and then you throw it away and get a new one.
Yeah, it's called built-in obsolescence, but they're not actually disposable. So these things in your hands will last in the earth for something like 5 million years. We evolved 200,000 years ago, so our phones will last 25 times longer than humans have so far. And things like phones and plastics and microchips are what geologists have started to call technofossils. So these are materials that weren't previously found in sedimentary records, but are starting to bury themselves into the rock, slowly fusing themselves to the Earth's crust. These are the kinds of geological and archaeological markers that are leading scientists to call our age the Anthropocene, an age in which humans, anthropoi, are driving geological change.
And phones do a weird thing to your perception of time too. So, for instance, if you open your diary app and go onto that year view where you can see a whole year at once, and for a few moments just give it a fair few vigorous scrolls down, literally by the time I finish talking, I am in the year 2294. It's like the phone knows it's immortal. We're going to use Instagram for a bunch of this show, so if you go ahead and click through onto our show account for us, which is Shopping Malls in Tehran, and click onto our profile, you'll see that at its heart, it's got a feed that is almost like anyone else's Instagram feed. So if you were to click on that first picture, you would see a row of photos that start now and go further and further into the past. In a normal person's Instagram account, that would start in a photo of them now and go further and further back into their life, at least as far back as 2011, which is when Instagram was founded. Our account starts with a picture now at the top of the show and goes further and further back into the rest of the show itself. And I think, well, that's the most iconic thing about Instagram. The way it allows you to curate a visual story about yourself and show the world how you came to be this way right now.
So the final part of Instagram we're going to use is the going live function. So this is something you do when you want to broadcast something to your followers as it happens. So when someone goes live, you'll see a little circular line around their profile picture. So I'm about to go live now, so we're going to test this out. So if you're on our profile page, you will in a moment see a little purple line around that guy in the suit. And when you do, I want you to tap on that and we'll all go live together.
You do, I want you to tap on that and we'll all go live together.
So there is something kind of weird about calling this live. I mean, there's a delay as the live feed travels through the ether and lands on your device wherever you are at different times. And at the same time you can hear Payvand on Instagram Live, you can also probably hear her on this device. So by the time you receive her on your phone, the moment's gone. So maybe it's more accurate to say that both versions of Payvand are speaking from the past. Going live isn't just about communicating from a different place. Perhaps more fundamentally, it's about communicating from a different time. The show's going to start now, and it's going to start on your phone. So you need to stay on Instagram Live. We're going to go right back to the beginning. Keep your phone in your hand. We're telling you about Instagram because it's where our story unfolds. We've been following a group of kids called the Rich Kids of Tehran. They're a social media hashtag, an Instagram page, and basically a fucking social phenomenon.
So go onto our profile and you'll see under the profile picture icon, there's a hashtag there, Rich Kids of Tehran. If you tap on that, you'll see a whole grid of photos come up. Now, these are photos that other users on Instagram have posted under the Rich Kids of Tehran hashtag. And take some time to enjoy these. There's money and cars and babies with money. Now, I don't know what the social function is of people posting such obnoxious photos of themselves, but it must be a way for them to feel connected to something bigger, universal, cosmic even, a way of placing themselves between a past and a future.
Yeah, there is some insane cars on there and some ridiculous haircuts, to be honest. These are the kids of the elite of Iranian society. So their parents will sit at the intersection between the traditional bazaar, the international markets, and the Revolutionary Guard. There'll be a section of those men and women who overthrew the Shah, fought and won a 10-year trench war against Saddam Hussein and basically everyone else in the world, and made political Islam the sort of household brand name it is today. So I think it's fair to say that when Iranians see their kids acting in this way on social media, it probably feels like all of that world is collapsing.
And all of this came to a head at 4:49 on the 30th of April 2015, when the drivers of this yellow Porsche lost control, flying from Shariati Boulevard, a road that cuts through near Varan, a super smart suburb up far town Tehran, and came to a fatal stop. Full of drink and drugs, Hossein Rabbani Shirazi, a grandson of a famous revolutionary Ayatollah, and Paribash Akbarzadeh, the middle-class girl he was cheating on his fiancée with, died instantly.
And then their Instagram accounts went viral. People poring over them as symbols of a corrupt and out-of-touch elite, oblivious to the world around them, careering out of control.
Now, it's important to remember that the rich kids of Instagram, who I think I am.
You're on this slide.
Yeah. It's important to remember that the rich kids of Instagram isn't just an Iranian phenomenon. So if you go back to our profile, you'll see there's some circular icons in our highlights. Tap on the one called Chatunga, and you'll see a video come up. Now, this is Chatunga Mugabe, that's Robert Mugabe's son, in a nightclub pouring a bottle of Bollinger over his Rolex watch. This is at a time when sanctions in Zimbabwe were putting chicken out of reach for most people.
And obviously, people called things like Javad and Payvan aren't here to tell you some story about how stupid black and brown people don't know how to spend their money properly, because, well, apart from anything else, there are plenty of white people up to this kind of nonsense as well.
So if you're back on our profile and you'd like to see some of these people, tap on the hashtag underneath called Rich Kids of Instagram, and you can see a whole world of money and cars and baby leopards.
How many watches has that guy got on?
But this isn't a new thing, and it's not just about Instagram. Rich people have always used images to display their wealth. So, 300 years ago, the painter Thomas Gainsborough could be commissioned to compose this portrait of a young couple, Mr. and Mrs. Andrews. And as part of that commission, he's to encode certain details about how they made their money, where their economic power comes from, into the design itself. Now, I know what you're thinking. They both have exactly the same face. I can test that by applying Instagram's patented face swapping technology. And in fact, I can take that experiment one step further, but I'm not exactly sure what that proves.
It proves I look great in a pair of breeches.
But the point is this: the angle on the landscape and the two tones, they're supposed to show how, in their marriage, these two young people united the two once warring branches of a single wealthy West Country landowning family.
The piles of corn are indicative of the new and innovative methods of the industrial farming that the thrusting Mr. Andrews is pioneering. His cocked gun tells us there is no sweating in a mill for him, but a wealth of leisure time to hunt, play and generally bother the local badgers.
Just like this traditional Safavid miniature painting, which encodes the different lavish hobbies of a prince in the men at his attendance. The musician and lute imply his sponsoring of the arts more broadly. The cup of wine in his hand is a gesture, metonymic, towards his big cellar. Suzanne Sontag pointed out that the arrival of domestic cameras in the 20th century democratised this ability to aestheticize and record your own life. Everyone could now use pictures to communicate their tastes and ambitions. We now upload more pictures to Instagram every day than existed in total 100 years ago. And as the gap between the rich and poor grows to neo-aristocratic levels, the new rich have made Instagram the place to stage these kinds of images again. They don't need to commission a master painter and wait 8 months whilst he encodes their riches into a landscape. They can just whack it all out on Instagram.
In Iran, this new kind of Instagram life has given rise to a new slang word to describe these rich kids, Aghazadeh, which is a play on the Persian word Shahzadeh, which means princeling. An Iranian rapper, Godal, had an underground hit with a tune called Aghazadeh, satirising these kinds of kids. The image shows a picture of a 16th century princeling relaxing in the corner of a hunt or a polo game, but it's photoshopped to have him wearing modern rich kids gear, like a Ralph Lauren polo and gold iPhone. So, this is a play about the children of the international elite.
It's about having all the privilege in the world and nothing but contempt for it.
This is a story of the billions of tiny decisions that make up history and get us here.
It's about why you shouldn't take cocaine and drive.
The feeling you can live forever.
Civilizational collapse.
Thermodynamics.
Instagram.
Why we find it easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of humanity.
The nature of narrative.
What we take from the earth and what we put back into it.
Rich people acting like dicks.
children fighting the police and the Iranian Revolution,
Aztec mythology,
the half-life of plutonium-239,
geology,
jealousy,
riding inflatable swans on rooftop swimming pools,
how sedimentation developed,
more cocaine,
the colonial history of nuclear testing,
shopping,
astronomy,
listening to Toto's Africa in a shopping mall in Des Moines in the early 1990s.
and what happens if you keep scrolling back from image to image down through deeper and deeper layers like a demented Instagram geologist.
Go to our Instagram feed. Part 1. Click on the first photo. 4:49 a.m. April 30th, 2015. The Shariati Boulevard. Neo Varon in far uptown North Tehran. This photo of a smashed up Porsche is uploaded to Instagram and spreads across the world.
Two young people were in the car. Hussein Rabbani Shirazi from a family of famous revolutionaries and Parivash Akbarzadeh, the middle-class girl he was cheating on his fiancée with. Hussein was a typical rich kid of Tehran, and this photo captures exactly the way the poorer people see the children of the revolutionary elite, free from the rules that everyone else has to follow. People get arrested for drinking alcohol. Unmarried men and women don't just get to hang out together. Obviously, this isn't anyone's actual Instagram feed. The Iranian regime tried to purge Hussein and Parivash from the internet, and when they heard about this show, the rich kids of Tehran threatened to sue.
Over the past few years, Iran has been crippled by increasingly brutal sanctions from the West generally, but especially from America. And a small group of the post-revolutionary elite have had to learn how to bust those sanctions, and they've grown incredibly rich as a result. But they don't flash their cash in public because the government tells the people that everyone is fighting an economic jihad together. So they don't drive yellow Porsches. The problem is, their kids do. Their kids have Instagram, and so does everyone else.
Scroll down. 4:48 a.m, 1 minute before the crash. Parivash is driving. Swigging from a bottle of Bollinger, the car accelerates, distance becomes pure speed. She opens the window and sings out of it, taking off the voice of the singer they're listening to with a voice deeper and richer than her own, the haze of champagne and declining uppers.
Hussein's filming her and the road as it's flying past.
She blows him a kiss. The steering wheel begins to pull against her hand. She grabs it.
So does Hussein.
She slams her foot down on the brake. It feels like the car is flying away from underneath them. There is no future, only now.
Everything turns red. Scroll down. 3 a.m, 2 hours before the crash. Hussein and Parivash are at a party in uptown Tehran. By the gates outside the villa are servants bribing the police. Hussein's blood boils with the hypocrisy. Fuck them. We run this whole country, he shouts. When the lights come back on, the host tells him to leave. Hussein lunges at him. He's bundled out the door. Parivash composes herself. She breathes out the momentary anger of having to look after him again and checks herself in the mirror. In the driver's seat, she puts the key in the ignition. Scroll down. 3.5 hours before the crash, 1:30 a.m. A bag of cocaine on the table. Hussein crushes, breaks, chops and racks, rolls up notes. The cocaine glides up Khomeini's face and past the names of the martyrs, into Hussein's network of capillaries, blood vessels and firing synapses, and then music. Hussein feels the cocaine pumping in his heart. Friends teasing him, talking about the war and whether Hussein would live up to his family's reputation as soldiers. Hussein is utterly ignorant of any of what this means, but then so is his friend. He says, if it come to it, he'd be willing to kill and die for the revolution and for his country, but the friend just laughs at him. Who are you going to kill? You and all that plastic surgery.
Scroll down. 11 p.m, 6 hours before the crash. Hussein and Parivash arrive at the party. Shishas and bikinis, designer dresses. A boomerang of Parivash opening a bottle of Bollinger. Hashtag don't be jealous. Hashtag blessings are blessings. 2 months' wages in one pop of a cork. For every 3 glasses of bolly or shots of Grey Goose she's offered, she artfully tips 2 away. She's just here with one boy she can trust in a way, but surrounded by boys from families who can do what they want to who they want.
Scroll down. Polo shirts and swimming shorts. The international uniform of "you can't arrest me, my dad's a lawyer." In this country, the uniform of "you can't arrest me, my dad runs the secret police." Parivash floats across the swimming pool on a massive inflatable swan. Cool. Hussein picks up 2 bottles of Bollinger, downs one, pours the other in the swimming pool.
Scroll down, 9 p.m, 8 hours before the crash. Parivash is driving home from the mall, singing along to an old hit. It's a bit syrupy and overly dramatic. The central metaphor is a mountain, but it's a bit unclear. Maybe the city is a mountain she must climb, or maybe her ambition is the mountain that nothing can conquer, or maybe her love for him is the mountain. But the voice and this song have enveloped 3 generations of women. It's a frame of a kind, a perspective that makes the way men treat them seem epic. And it's not just some rubbish about the life she's going to have when she makes it uptown with her man. She knows this can't last forever, and maybe tomorrow or maybe next month, Hussein will get married. But right now, she's alive, and she feels good. In the gridlocked traffic, the song helps her imagine that she's speeding along. Glamour and immortality will break out of the physical mountains in the north of the city. And she sings along again. You're proud, you're beautiful, you don't need anyone. You are the mountains.
Scroll down. Hussein's silent. His father's holding up a newspaper and screaming at him. Do you think you can just do what you want? You can't drive that car up and down outside the bazaar with sanctions the way that they are. Hussein wants to explode. He knows he should keep the feeling in his chest, but the word rips up through his ribcage and out of his mouth. I can't just sit around the house all day, can I? You won't find me anything real to do. Oh, and why is that? His dad asks, snorting. You think you can come to work at the department? At my office? Now? You're a disgrace. His mother plays good cop. Now, don't argue with your father. Our son can't do any old job though, can he? I mean, maybe go to Europe and do a master's or something. Hussein storms out. He realises his hair's fucked, and so he fixes it. In the car park, he throws himself across the bonnet of his Porsche and takes a photo.
Scroll down. 8 hours later, that car is flying away from underneath them. There is no future, only now.
Everything turns red.
An Instagram feed tells us a story backwards over time, a story built out of discrete moments of flows, frozen, it's always now. The ubiquity and increasing power of camera phones means that we're able to capture smaller and smaller amounts of time through image, keeping us in an ever-precise and perpetual present. When Louis Daguerre took the first photo of a human in 1838, it took 10 minutes of exposure to capture one person. Today, if you take a photo on your camera phone, it takes about 16 milliseconds. We upload about 1.8 billion pictures to social media every day. That's about 657 billion photos a year. That's an insane number to think of, or to connect your own photos to.
To put it another way, we take more photos every 2 minutes than existed in total in 1838. But we've always been a bit crap at understanding certain big numbers or time spans like that. Ones which are specific, massive, but not infinite. Human beings are, broadly speaking, good at understanding 2 kinds of time spans, either 2 generations in either direction or infinity itself. So hence Plato, Muhammad, Buddha, and Jesus. We're especially bad at remembering and thinking through the kinds of time spans we need to understand real civilizational change. And that's exactly what we need to think through the Anthropocene and climate change. They're the ones that give us this dizzying sense of history speeding up. Like, for instance, Cleopatra died 3 times further away from the foundation of ancient Egypt than she did from us today.
You don't even have to go that far back to find timescales that fuck with your head. So Nirvana released Nevermind closer to the release of the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper than today. The first Beatles LP came out closer in time to the end of the First World War than to us. The first iPhone came out closer to the fall of the Berlin Wall than to us.
A polystyrene cup has a lifespan of about 1 million years, which means it will remain in the earth for about as long into the future as the discovery of the use of fire by early hominids is into the past. In the same way, the half-life of plutonium-239 is about 124,000 years, which means that will be decaying in the Earth for about as long into the future as the Chauvet cave paintings are into the past, which is why it feels impossible to take responsibility for some nuclear waste or a polystyrene cup.
It's where we start to get into geological time, being defined by things that we're burying into layers of rock. It's not a register we find easy to put ourselves in.
Those parts of who we are that get captured in the rock and the ice core, the marks that increasingly we're leaving globally.
And in millions of years' time, people will find those marks of us, and those traces will tell the story of who we were.
They'll find concrete, nuclear particles, polystyrene and plastic cups, iPhones, shopping malls, AirPods, like a fuck ton of plastic waste.
And a solid layer of fossilised chicken bones that will show the story of how 10,000 years ago we took a small bird from the Malaysian jungle, standardised and domesticated it, and how we spent the next 5,000 years spreading that across the world.
As a species, we now eat so much chicken that we are leaving nearly a solid layer of chicken bones all across the surface of this planet, and they're obviously starting to fossilise. Which means that if in a million years some sort of space alien geologist arrives to try and understand who we are and kind of how we lived, they may very well call this the age of the identical clone chickens and their two-legged nemesis. And in a way, that would be the most objectively true thing of us as a species. Like, the collective, globalised marks we leave are so big that they necessitate naming a new geological era. The Anthropocene. Geologists are arguing about when this started, I suppose, because if you're clear on what starts something and when it starts, you can try and guess how it will end and how it might be stopped.
The past 600 years of globalised trade are leaving marks on the Earth that will be legible for millions of years, whereas the 200,000 years before leave nothing.
Go back to our feed and click on part 2. Scroll down to the first photo. 4 weeks before the crash. Hussein and Parivash arrive at the Kurosh Mall. The security guards recognise him and they call him Little Agha and he calls them Uncle and passes them a few notes in cash. But as soon as he's walked around the corner, they all laugh at him behind his back. Hossein and Parivash have just got back from Dubai and the Kourosh Mall is probably the only place they can hang out in public in Tehran together after everything that's happened.
Scroll down. They sit in Kourosh Mall and eat sushi and take photos of themselves, half sitting, half lying on restaurant chairs. Scroll down. Parivash takes a photo of herself. She plays too tired from all the flying and partying. The picture shows 7 shopping bags with labels in Arabic, Persian and English. She hashtags it. Never stop shopping. She takes another photo, making sure it catches the plaster on her nose. The first bit of plastic surgery her parents have saved up for, and a preview of a more European nose underneath. Scroll down. Parivash remembers when this place first opened. She wasn't with Hussein then and was just like any other kid at the time, proud of this new country with bits of glamour and money and some sort of freedom. She'd daydream about actually shopping here. As they leave, she notices an older man in the corner of the car park. He's wearing a mall janitor uniform. 2 policemen are beating him. The stolen sandwiches in his pockets squash and stain his clothes. He pleads with the policeman and calls them nephew. Scroll down. Parivash takes another photo of her and Hussein. 6 weeks before the crash. Parivash sits alone in her room in her parents' house. She sees hateful comments on her Instagram feed. People attacking her for the life she's living, calling her classless, a downtown social climber, a slut. She thinks about the people sat thousands of miles away, scrolling through her account and seeing a story, and is proud of it though. She's gone out and got what she wants. She deletes some of the most abusive comments. Someone has gone through every photo that they think shows some sort of plastic surgery and labelled it. But she'll never turn her account off public, never. This is her. This is a recording of how she gets to live and the places that she gets to go. And if people don't like it, well, it's her that gets to be in it right now and them who sit on their own wishing that they could be her. Her sister is turning her music up loud in the next room again, blasting that song Agazadeh, trying to get under her skin, trying to hurt her. Scroll down. In the corner of her room, she composes a picture. Her room is tiny. At one end there is a thin window that lets in a chink of light and the sound of sirens. Her small desk and chair are tattered and her single bed takes up half the room. But she puts a found out stack of dollars on the floor, and on her screen she softens the abrasive city light to look like morning breaking over a Balearic cafe or the light of villas on the Gulf. Her sister Daria bursts into the room. She throws a copy of the newspaper onto the bed. The headline reads, Agazadehs, a sign of corruption and social problems. She points at Hussein and his best friend on the front. I told you something like this would happen. Parivash says nothing. She saw the newspaper this morning. They've taken the newspaper from the stands, but everyone saw it this morning, Daria says. Dad's gone mental. Parivash can't believe that her sister would go out of her way to show him. Daria reads this on her face. I didn't even tell him. The whole neighbourhood is talking about you. You're not going anywhere. Scroll down. Hussein is in the car outside, but her dad is in the corner of the room, his belt in his hand. Parivash looks down at her phone as it rings. He slaps it out of her hand. She picks it up and runs outside. Gets in the car and breathes out. Hussein grabs her hand and asks her how she's doing. Makes everything easy. On the side of a street, a young man is waiting for a cop to pass. He leaves and takes a spray can and writes on the wall, hashtag, the hungry ones are coming. The drab middle-class districts and the slums downtown fall away from her. Hussein accelerates as she takes off into the neon and pink and artificial purples.
Scroll down. 6 weeks and 1 day before the crash. Hussein sits in the small guest room of his father's offices. His dad has promised to get him something cool to do at the ministry, but Hussein's fucked it up again. He just needs a chance to show what he's capable of. At times like this, he gets this nagging feeling of self-hate that starts off like a whispering in his ear and then becomes something that crawls up the inside of his skin. His dad's assistant comes back into the room. Hossein can see the flicker of contempt on the old man's smile. "Little Aga," he says, "Boy king, your dad wanted me to tell you that now might not perhaps be the best time for you to begin your career in public service." "Can't I talk to my dad?" Hossein asks. "No, he'll see you at home." Hossein goes to storm out, but the old man grabs him, bony fingers cutting into his wrists. "If you're going to run around with whores, try not to get caught," he hisses into Hossein's ear. So when the old man leaves, Hossein just sits down where he was, pulls out his flask of expensive smuggled-in brandy, racks up a line of coke on a portrait of the Supreme Leader, and thinks, fuck these people. This world is full of hate and jealousy. I mean, these people, they want to see me live my life, but they can't stand that I might actually live it for myself. He sends Parivash a text. He tells her he wants to go to Dubai again. Scroll down. He does another shot, films it, flips a gesture at the camera. When he puts that picture on Instagram, he doesn't stop to realise that his followers might soon begin to recognise his father's office and that the scandal will get a lot deeper for him and for his family.
Tehran is like any other city. You can find out almost everything you need to know about it from knowing a little of the history of its shopping malls. Kurosh Mall, the kind of shopping mall that Hossein and Parivash might hang out in, is in the far, far north of the city. Over the past 2 decades, the richest suburbs of the city have moved further and further north into the mountains, where the filth and the smog of downtown can't travel. The capital for those shopping centres was put up by men like Hossein's father, who used their connections to the international markets, political connections in Iran, connections to the Revolutionary Guards and traditional bazaar to get permits to import the newest and smartest Western brands.
Kurosh Mall is named after the indigenous Persian pronunciation of Cyrus, as in Cyrus the Great. He's the mythologized founder of the First Persian Empire. He's been a symbol for Iranian nationalism for about 200 years, for the monarchists and the Islamic Republic. I mean, you'll definitely know him from his substantial donations to the British Museum. So there's 4,000 years history in plastic decorations by the main entrance, the same brand you might find in Dubai or West London.
If you scroll down, further into the past and 20 kilometres further south, you'd reach where Uptown was 50 years ago. It's here that the Shah built the Plasco Centre as a symbol of his regime's modernisations. Keep scrolling further south and you'll meet the Grand Bazaar, a building sprawling tens of kilometres in every direction. For 400 years, it was the centre of the city.
Scroll down even further to the far south of the city and you can follow a 5,000-year journey of the city back down to the ancient Neolithic settlement in a poorer suburb today called Ray.
And there you'll find some of the oldest remains of human settlement, like others in the Middle East, Africa and China. They show marketplaces and areas for trading, buildings for maintaining an economic surplus. It's in these that we learn the basic story about who we are and how our society came to develop. That the things that came first are trade before anything else.
And the same way we look at those remains now to tell us who we were then, our shopping centres will be looked at in the future. They're made out of concrete, so like Roman remains, they will last for hundreds of thousands of years. You can even think of them as geological markers of our age. Geologists define markers as things that are globally present and leave sedimentary foundations. Shopping malls are globally present, with the same shops everywhere, and their physical foundations are a layer of concrete sediment. Geologists also talk about how the fossil record of this moment will show a collapse of global diversity, but at the same time, much more diversity in every given location. It's like being able to get any kind of food, but only from the same chains in any mall in the world.
Part 3. Scroll down. 1 year before the crash. When the plane touches down in Dubai, Parivash squeezes Hussein's hand. This is her first time outside of Iran. She hasn't slept at all.
Hussein wakes up slowly. He knocks the drinks holder with his knee. He's used to coming first class, but he didn't tell his parents this time, just snuck the tickets onto the credit card and came over.
Scroll down. The hotel room is huge. Parivash takes a photo of the city skyline, making sure her manicured hand is just in shot. This is it, she thinks. She video calls her sister. She asks if her parents have gone to bed. Daria says they have. She shows Daria the room. Daria can't believe that she's not using a filter. Parivash asks if the lie she told her parents is holding up. Daria says it is. Parivash makes her promise to tell her if they begin to suspect anything. She hangs up and walks downstairs. The valet walks her to the hire car, and the automatic door of a yellow Ferrari pops open. She steps in and offers Hussein a swig of champagne.
They have wagyu, oysters, more champagne at the 27th floor place at the Burj Al Arab. Hussein tells Parivash the story of the city, how Dubai popped fully formed from the desert. That night, they drive by the waterfront and Hussein shows her the hotels, some built like Moorish souks or Persian gardens or Byzantine palaces. All of that history made into a pastiche out of glass, chrome and plastic. It's like the long generations of the dead returning eternally just to party with them. Scroll down. The next morning, they eat breakfast hungover. Hussein wants to go back to bed, but Parivash wants to drive out of the city.
Scroll down. 3 Diet Cokes and 4 paracetamols later, they're driving out to Al-Bastikia, the old Persian quarter. Parivash read about it before they came. Something about it, the only preserved bit of local culture, or maybe the way it was built by Iranians fleeing religious persecution centuries ago, or the way it's preserved as ancient amidst all the modern architecture made her want to see it.
Hussein scrolls through his phone in the passenger seat.
Scroll down. When they arrive at the old Persian quarter, it's nearly noon, so the streets are deserted. The air is thin and burning hot. Parivash has to practically drag Hussein out of the car. In the central square, Parivash takes the scene in. An old woman is beating dust from a carpet against the side of the road. The sun warms yellows from the bricks of the ancient outer walls of the surrounding houses.
Hussein takes a drink from the fountain and then walks back over to Parivash.
Parivash has a heart full of the stuff that she wants to say. She wants to tell Hussein that the old woman makes her think of how quickly history moves, how a generation ago both their families would have lived like this, in a part of Tehran that had slowness and chador-wearing women and extended families sharing rooms like this, that the class difference between them is less than 60 years old, that she doesn't care that he won't leave his fiancée, and that even if her father finds out and her mother knows, she wouldn't really care, because she'll only ever be passed from one man to another, no matter how much she studies, from her father's house to her husband's. That to carve out a moment where she feels alive is worth an eternity of flowing along.
They sit next to each other. On the side of the fountain, Hussein lights a cigarette. He knows that Parivash is thinking about stuff. Something about that woman moves him too.
Parivash takes a drag on his cigarette. In a way, she says, it's better if you're silent sometimes. Like a mountain, like in the old song, you know? Silent or patient like a mountain. Or we drive up the mountain together and just stop all the normal boring chatter of life or whatever. The point is we're having fun and nothing lasts forever.
Mountains last forever, don't they? Hussein asks.
Parivash looks at him. They erode, you idiot.
They sit silently together in the heat. That rhythmic beating of the woman's beater on the carpet seems to cut through and rattle around Hussein's head. Things that they'll never know how to begin to say to each other. Hussein takes out his phone. He's scrolling to try and get rid of that sound, and The heat is just so intense, and the silence is enveloping him, the things that he can't say, and that echoing, banging, cutting through all of it. It fills up Hussein's head and begins to make him feel like he's falling backwards.
Parivash is struggling to focus on her phone screen, scrolling to try and let go of the feeling, that banging, rattling around in her skull, feeling like it's dragging her back to it. Scroll down. They both begin to feel sick and woozy, and suddenly it's like they're falling backwards. Pictures flash past them. Some are from 20 years ago. The first pair of Western trainers his father managed to get for him. The war had just ended, and his father promised to get him some Nikes, but all he managed was Gola, for God's sake. 90s though. Actually, they're coming back.
But that's not important now. They're falling further and further and faster back and further down what seems to be a timeline. They see pictures they only vaguely recognise, like Hussein as a child, stood by the Grand Bazaar. Tehran beginning to be rebuilt just after the war, his father in military fatigues, the revolution, like, what the actual fuck?
Mushroom clouds break through. The arrival of the British and the Portuguese in the Persian Gulf, warships on the horizon, steam engines and the cracking of rock, and the pickaxe handle drives him further down. All at once, it disappears, and everything turns black.
Hussein and Parivash can hardly see anything. They're floating through what seems like deep space. As Hussein's eyes adjust, he makes out the faint glimmers of certain figures. Ancient Persian and Greek warriors, early British imperialists, medieval princes and noblemen. He begins to recognise one as something he's seen in a school textbook. He seems to be popping into reality in 3 weirdly Instagram dimensions. The figure is towering above him. Hussein thinks he recognises him. He's dressed almost entirely like a 14th century nobleman or prince, but he's wearing a pink Ralph Lauren polo shirt and carrying a gold iPhone. Hussein's eyes remain fixed in terror at the incongruity of the device in his hand.
Great, isn't it? Got it here, actually. We have this, super weird atemporal version of the Cyrus Mall. I mean, it's real gold. Cool, no?
What are you? Hussein asks.
Sorry, yeah, totally sorry. I am Prince Thomas Ismail Johangir Sefudullah.
Hussein just looks blankly.
I'm basically the youngest son of some ancient king you've never heard of. Never heard of because I never really did anything. I've been here for 500 years, bro. Just kind of floating around. But it's cool, bro. We have malls here, and there's a really cool sushi place.
Hussein sees Parivash floating far away. She's looking at the figure too. Why did you bring me here? He asks.
Oh, I didn't bring you here, bro. It's where you belong. This is the place where you end up if you were playing polo and hunting whilst the British arrived in the Gulf and the Russians in the Caspian. Being dead for 600 years really gives you some perspective, bro. You need to get a handle on things.
But when they come to by the fountain, Hussein and Parivash just walk silently back to the car. Hussein puts his key in the ignition and they accelerate away. As older millennials, me and Pavand are on the older side of people who use these kinds of platforms.
The Instagram native generation is a much more creative thing. They shape reality with it, imagining and photoshopping whole worlds that may or may not have actually existed.
One interesting example of this is an online movement called Vaporwave. Now, Vaporwave is named after Vaporware, which is the name that software engineers give to software that never quite made it to market or properly got released. So by extension, Vaporwave is sound and music and graphics made out of recycled parts of kind of retro software, bits of the internet, like this piece of music you can hear now, which is made up of sounds from Windows 95, old GeoCities websites, and a saxophone line from a little old place called Encarta Encyclopedia on CD-ROM. Vaporwave music and visuals are sort of a ghost. made out of bits and pieces of a past that never quite was.
One recent subgenre of vaporwave is called morewave. So go back to our profile and tap on that hashtag that says morewave. Now this hashtag orders all the images tagged with morewave, and there's millions and millions on Insta and more on YouTube. It's about that feeling of hyperabundance in the late Reagan to early Clinton eras. It's been put together by some 15-year-old stoners in the US, or kids who are the fans of those kind of 90s teen comedies that centre around a shopping mall. Over the past few years, shopping malls and high streets have collapsed, and this is a celebration of the bits that have been left behind.
This you can see now is one of the biggest and most successful morewave videos. It's got 2.5 million individual views on YouTube alone. As you can hear, it's basically a loop of Toto's Africa playing over footage of shopping malls all over small town America. It's easy to laugh, but I think I get it. I mean, it's the smell of pretzels, it's the feeling of going to a mall in a fairly bleak part of America and then getting swamped in something warm and fuzzy. It's Saved by the Bell, shopping, lip gloss, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Stranger Things. The soft tinkle of the sound of fountains and the warm synths of the music coming from hidden speakers.
The hashtag morewave has a few million followers on Instagram. Morewave might be easier to understand if those kids were our age, in that we remember retail high street shopping and a time before Amazon, but it isn't. It's mainly for younger people, 18 and 19-year-olds who don't remember a time before the Great Recession or the rise of internet consumerism. If you talk to them online or read their comments, everyone circles around the same thing, an awareness that this isn't the way that you consume regular pop music or culture.
It's something used to unplug and relax to. It's a sort of creative way of digging up the past and finding the last heroic age of consumer capitalism, the last time those young people are told when it felt like life was getting better bit by bit, to remind them, as one kid said to us, of a time they never knew, when things weren't quite as shitty. 2010, 5 years before the crash. Hossein and Parivash are yet to meet, and Instagram is yet to reach Iran. Hossein's father is a fat old man sitting at the intersection of power, links to the international markets, the Revolutionary Guards, and the traditional bazaar. He's about to commission his first shopping centre. If we want to get back further into the story of Hossein and Parivash and find out what propelled them forwards into that crash, we have to go further back, into the story of that generation before, into a world before Instagram, when people built and betrayed countries and revolutions, and when stories were made of something more cinematic and sepia.
1985, 30 years before the crash. The height of the Iran-Iraq War. Hussein's father crouches in the back of a truck crossing the border into Kurdish Iraq. A man is tied up next to him. 100 miles inside the border and the truck stops. The Americans are wearing Kurdish clothes. They speak American accented Kurdish and Persian. They promise 500 anti-tank missiles, but the Revolutionary Guards are to use their sway to have American hostages freed in Lebanon. They want a guarantee. Hussein's father walks back to the truck. The tied-up man is writhing. Hussein's father grabs at him to keep him still. He leans in close and threatens him. Takes off the hood. The man bites him hard. A blow, and the man is silent. Hussein's father heaves the man up onto his shoulder and walks back. He throws him in front of the Americans. The Americans immediately recognise the man as a member of the rival faction of the Revolutionary Guards. "You boys sure know how to make an impression," one American says. Hussein's father replies in heavily accented English, "We know how to make you take us seriously."
December 1971, 44 years before the crash. 8 years, a whole world before the Iranian Revolution. Hussein's father is one of hundreds of thousands of poor kids in traditional families watching the height of the Shah's pomp on small TVs in the corner of small two-room homes. In the desert sun, picked out slightly too red by the cameras, he sees the Shah, The TV announcer gives the date in the new calendar year the Shah has forced on the country, and the titles he's taken from Cyrus the Great. King of Kings, Shadow of God on Earth. In the desert, the sun breaks from behind a cloud. The Shah steps forward.
کوروش شاه بزرگ شاه شاهان آزاد مرد آزاد مردان و قهرمان تاریخ ایران و جهان آسوده بخواب زیرا که ما بیداریم و همواره بیدار خواهیم بود.
When he arrives at his father's stall in the bazaar, Hussein's father sneaks for a cigarette with Murtaza, who works on the stall next door. Every cinema in Tehran will be showing the film of that morning's speech tonight. Murtaza has never seen Hussein's father like this. His eyes are clear and he holds his body straight. He invites Murtaza to join him and some of the other young bazaris after evening prayers. When Murtaza arrives, Hussein's father is already splitting the boys up into lookouts and window breakers. By 3 a.m, there isn't a single cinema window left unsmashed in the surrounds of the bazaar or a poster left up. As they stand, triumphant, under the final window, Murtaza scrawls "Death to the King, Death to America" on the wall. A whistle. 2 policemen are running towards them. The boys begin to scatter. Hussein's father remains rooted to the spot. As the first policeman gets closer, he feels the knife in his pocket. The policeman goes down. In the darkness, his colleague sees him hit the floor and stops running. He begins to blow his whistle harder. More will arrive soon. As Hussein's father runs home, he feels like a freedom fighter, like a jihadi. In his mind, in this dream that returns throughout his life, he'll never stop running. Through being the hero of the bazaar, to being the hero of the streets and the Revolutionary Guard, to toppling this King of Kings, fighting in a bloody desert trench war, and then building a new state. He'll keep on running further uptown, to opportunity and wealth and a family and a son that he never really understands and who never really knows where he came from.
There is no such thing as time. No past, no future. There's no reason why time as we feel it should be a physical thing.
We just think of time being linear because we always happen to see effects following causes. Time can't be reversed, we think. We can't actually go backwards.
But the difference between past and future, between cause and effect, between memory and hope, between regret and intention, in the elementary laws that describe the mechanisms of the universe, there is no such difference. Forward in time is just the direction in which we gain knowledge. Entropy increases.
Entropy is just a measure of how disordered a system is. In any physical process in the universe, whether you turn on an electrical light or fire up a radiator, you lose some of your ordered energy as heat.
The ultimate end of everything is the heat death of the universe, all order gone into a sort of homogeneous clustered matter of the same temperature.
So time only emerges because we happen to be the kind of animals that look for order in things, and it's only really a measure of how much things have fallen apart at any given moment.
In the 1930s, Walter Benjamin described looking at this painting by Paul Klee, Angelus Novus.
Benjamin thinks that this is what the angel of history ought to look like. His wings outspread, his face turned towards the past. Where we see the unfolding of a chain of events, he sees just one single catastrophe that evermore hurls bodies and rubble by its feet.
He wants to pause for a moment to awaken the dead and piece together what has been smashed, but he can't. The storm that is blowing from paradise is so strong that he can't close his wings, and so it blows him irresistibly into the future, and around him, the rubble and the corpses keep growing.
And that storm is what we call progress. Which is why 50 million people being killed in the Americas is just the beginning. There's now a world to be colonised.
So property, commerce and patriarchy that began in the Neolithic will accelerate and mutate.
4/5 of the world and its population become property to be harvested.
West Africa and India, the biggest prizes to be taken.
So Europeans will need to find new ways of powering their ships and new ports to moor them en route to India.
So modernity arrives and the competing gunships of the British, the Portuguese and the Russians in places like Iran.
And traditional life is smashed apart and people lose the ability to support themselves from the land, and so all of that history and commerce can be made to flow through Europe.
So when the Industrial Revolution hits its stride, the Middle East will already be in freefall, and the British Petroleum Company claim Iranian oil fields.
So a man is sent from London to expel the indigenous people who live on the oil fields, and the Iranian Shahs become puppets of the West.
And generations will dream of freeing their countries.
And the West will dream of bigger and better empires, so they'll need bigger and better bombs.
So islands and deserts are cleared for bombs to be tested, tribes driven across the sea.
And every human being born since 1948 will be born with slightly radioactive teeth.
And in Iran, people will dream of freedom and owning their own oil, but the Americans will bring the final Shah to power, so he will feel like a puppet.
So he'll build places like the Plasco shopping centre to show the world how modern he is.
And one morning he'll stand in the desert and claim the immortal line of Cyrus the Great.
Who've always seen their world crumble already, will be driven further away from his regime and ultimately overthrow it.
Which will mean that the longest trench war of human history will be fought over the control of bodies and the earth of Iranian oil fields.
So men like Hussein's father will have to learn to break international sanctions to bring weapons into the country.
Which means that when the war ends, Hussein's father goes back to civilian life. His links to the bazaar and international trade place him to bring postmodern consumerism to Iran.
So in Tehran, he'll commission a jumbled up version of all of that history and build it out of plastic and concrete and call it the Kurosh shopping mall.
So when Hussein grows up with money and meets a girl called Paribash, they will both search in that jumbled history for something that they can get some sort of traction on. But there'll be nothing to do but to go to Dubai and take her shopping to the Kurosh shopping mall, so they can briefly be people to aspire to or dream of being.
But that means when the sanctions bite again and the economy collapses, Hussein and Paribash will be briefly people to aspire to, but then people to hate.
Which makes Hussein feel trapped between a vision of being some kind of heir to his father's money, but also an heir to his regime.
And of course Hussein can't understand this, and Paribash isn't going to give up her little taste of freedom, so when he storms out his parents' house after an argument, they'll just drive to a party uptown.
And with all of that and the drugs and the booze in his head, at 3 a.m, Hussein throws himself at the host.
Which means when they're thrown out of the party, they now really have nothing else to do but finish all the cocaine and the bolly and rag his Porsche up and down the Shariati Boulevard until at 4:48 a.m, Paribash loses control.
And everything turns red. Everywhere, people feel like things are ending. Economies, ecologies, political systems, civilizations.
If we want to know how to change direction, we have to know where we started from, or there really is nothing else to do but put your foot down and accelerate.
In 1995, a grassy plain somewhere between Turkey, Iraq and Iran, a team of archaeologists and geologists make a discovery that upend how we think of human history.
At Göbekli Tepe, they found a huge stone temple with evidence of early beer brewing. It was built around 14,000 years ago, kilometres in length, carved with vivid images of animals and humans, the whole complex pointing towards Sirius, the dog star.
The discovery of Göbekli Tepe was a challenge to the 200-year-old paradigm of how human societies began. For hundreds of years, European archaeologists had a rigid story about human development. Commerce before culture, marketplace before temples, farming before beer brewing. But history isn't linear. It turns out we were artists and stargazers and vintners before we had so-called civilization.
The discovery of Göbekli Tepe fundamentally changes the story of human development. Imagine the people and society that built Stonehenge. That was 4,000 years ago. Göbekli Tepe had already been buried for 9,000 years. The 200,000 years of human prehistory before the story we all know and not full of darkness and nothing. Commerce didn't come first. Trying to make sense of the things around us did. Göbekli Tepe stood for 4,000 years, which is 10 times as long as the Houses of Parliament have stood so far. And then, for some reason, it was meticulously and carefully buried at the dawn of the Neolithic, sitting undisturbed for 13,000 years before it was found under that hill between Iran, Iraq and Turkey in 1995.
It's impossible to know what the social function of Göbekli Tepe was, but it must have been a way for them to see themselves in relation to something universal and cosmic, a way of locating themselves between a past and a future.
When we were researching this show, we spoke to a geologist, and she told us that they think about the Earth like a hard drive or a computer server, a sort of store of information about past decisions. Everything we've ever done and everyone we've ever been, we leave behind us in the Earth. So the Earth is full of stories about who we are, and one of them says that before we did anything else, we would gather twice a year to get drunk together and look up and wonder about the stars.
We've deleted the feed you've been following. Some things we dig up, and some things we bury.